quick recording because I have explained several times in various posts over the years and forums why it's not a good idea to run a little breather filter on this the hot side valve cover vent. If you're running a factory ECU with the factory airflow meter or mass airflow sensor. If it's a 1.6, it's got this funky little flapper door thing called an airflow meter. If it's a 1.8, it's got a mass airflow sensor. They do the same thing. The technology behind them is different, but it's not really relevant. So here I have a diagram I made that shows a cone filter on a MAF sensor or AFM as well, and then the factory crossover tube into the throttle body into the intake, and you can see we have our factory hose hooked up on the breather side and our factory PCV valve. This is our fuel rail with our 4 injectors, valve cover, spark plugs. So when you open this throttle, air will rush in past this sensor and go into the engine, and we all know that. What the MAF or the AFM is doing is measuring how much air in cubic feet or cubic centimeters or any volume of measurement. The unit's not important here. The engine is telling, or this sensor is telling the computer that runs the engine how much air has passed beyond the sensor. And then as it runs into the intake to get distributed, the computer says, oh, that was a 1.5 liters of air just rushed past. Let's mix the right amount of fuel for that much air and introduce that much fuel into the ignition event, the combustion event, to get a really good clean mixture of air and fuel, the proper ratio, burn it, and send it out the exhaust. So if you are letting a whole bunch of air in and then you suddenly close your throttle, the amount of air rushing past this sensor suddenly stops, and this very quickly becomes a vacuum. So when it becomes a vacuum, it's trying to suck air. The engine's still trying to suck in air and rev to redline all the time, and you're just choking it basically by closing this throttle. So a little bit of air is seeping through based on your idle air control settings, and that little bit of airflow is still registering here in the MAF, and you're getting idle amounts of fuel under vacuum. So here's where things get tricky. So your crankcase at the bottom of this engine is filled with oil and moisture, and it's getting hot, and the moisture is evaporating, and it's putting water in the oil, and that oil is evaporating as steam. And under vacuum, when you have this closed, it's all being sucked out through this PCV valve. It's a one-way valve, so it opens and it lets the air from the crankcase into your intake. Now, all this air is already trapped in an enclosed system, so it's not throwing off your air measurements, air fuel, right? Also, it's not really fresh air, so it doesn't really affect the combustion. But when this is under a huge vacuum and it's pulled all that moisture and everything out, sometimes it's hungry for more because the negative pressure on this is pretty high. So what it'll do is it will actually put the valve cover under vacuum, and you'll have air rushing in through this line. Now the benefit is, if air has gone through the filter, past this sensor, then the computer knows about it. And once it goes into this pipe and passes up through here, into the valve cover, and then is sucked out through your PCV valve into the intake plenum and given to the engine, the fuel being delivered for that amount of air has still been calculated because that air has passed through your MAF. So it's gone through and it's gone into the engine, just like when you're under wide open throttle and it goes into the engine. So why it's bad to just put a breather filter on here and capping this is that under those vacuum situations, you're going to be drawing in air from the atmosphere directly into your valve cover that will then get sucked by the manifold through this PCV valve. And that's what in automotive industries they call unmetered air. It's not been metered or measured by any sort of sensor. So the ECU has no idea where it's coming from. It will register as a vacuum leak on 1.6 cars because the AFM is not super sensitive. It's going to be less noticeable. But basically, whenever you're cracking this throttle open from closed, whether you're getting started at idle at a red light or you're shifting up and you lift off the throttle to get the next gear, you're going to notice a stumble or a hesitation when you go from positive pressure of the air just rushing right in to negative, where you suddenly close it off and this goes under quick vacuum. What you want is for it to be drawing metered air into the system and not unmetered air, or you're going to get hesitations. And you're also going to be running lean, which can be dangerous because lean fuel mixtures burn hotter than proper stoichiometric mixtures or rich mixtures. So you're going to be more likely to have pre-detonation in the engine bay. And the proper way to run a breather on this is to get rid of the MAF sensor entirely, which means you have to run a standalone ECU. Then you hook up to one of the various vacuum nipples on this manifold. You'll hook a mass air pressure, a MAP sensor, manifold air pressure. Some people call it manifold absolute pressure. There's lots of names. What it does is it tells the ECU how much air pressure is in the plenum. And then you need to combat that, or not combat, but complement rather, with something very close to the throttle body called an intake air temperature sensor, or IAT. Maybe it's AIT, air intake temperature. It doesn't matter. It measures the temperature of the air, and you put it close to the throttle body. So what it'll do is it'll tell the ECU what temperature the air is and at what pressure it's at, and it'll use that to determine how much fuel to give the engine. This is how Megasquirt operates. This is how Speedy EFI operates. This is how just about any standalone ECU you'd be using on a naturally aspirated or boosted setup is going to operate. Once you're no longer running off of a mass airflow sensor or an AFM either, you're safe to run this open because it's no longer important or relevant to the way that the fuel is being calculated. And in high boost situations, it's usually recommended to run a hose to a catch can somewhere on the cold side, and then vent that catch can to atmosphere, and then also run a catch can on this little guy with the retain the factory PCV valve or upgrade to a 323 GTX unit. It's better for boost, and you'll want to run that into the input of a catch can, a sealed catch can, and then the output of the sealed catch can will then run back to the manifold. So you're running a dual catch can setup. This is on high boost applications. One catch can is vented and hooked to your hot side, and the other is sealed and is in series with the factory PCV routing. And then you're safe to go. Everything should drive like OEM as long as you have a good tune. You're not going to be running lean. You're not going to be affecting your vacuum to positive pressure drivability. Sorry, this was a long explanation. I know it can be difficult to convey in text, and I really want to help people learn how this stuff works fundamentally, and I don't want people to just see a little filter zip tied on here on Instagram and think, oh, that's cool, and then they just throw a cap on here, throw the filter on, and they don't know why they're doing it, or they think, oh, I'm gonna have less oil in my intake. Truth be told, this vent never pushes much airflow in this direction. It's mostly always going to be sucking the fresh air from behind the filter into the engine. And then this guy, yeah, very much a catch can on this side is good on any build, naturally aspirated or turbocharged, but you will have to empty the catch can and replace the oil that's being lost. But that will prevent some oil from being sucked out of the crankcase and into the intake. So that's good to do on even OEM applications. Let me know if you guys like this video. I can do another one that describes how a coolant relocation, the coolant reroute kits help Miata engines last a lot longer. I have Illustrator, that's what I use to make this diagram. I can do some good diagrams for that too if you guys have ever wondered how the science of it works. Yeah, so thank you for the time if you watch this. Again, I know it was pretty long, but I wanted to explain how it all works, because this is how we learn, right? It doesn't help to just be angry in the comments and say, you don't know what you're doing, you're stupid, no, you know, when we could build each other up and show how these systems work fundamentally. So, yeah.